Something in storytelling that is a literary device is called motifs. Motifs are patterns within a story that show up throughout the story, not as much as themes do, but they want to remind you of the theme. So for example, a very popular motif in a movie is probably one of the most celebrated, most watched horror movies of all time, and that is Jaws. In Jaws, you hear the motif throughout the entire movie. Whenever you hear the sound, da-dum, da-dum. Whenever you hear that, your body immediately just kind of cringes up. You don't know what is about to happen, but something bad is going to happen. That's what motifs do. They bring you into the story to feel what the characters are feeling, to feel what the storyteller is wanting you to feel. There are motifs all throughout the book of Genesis, and one of them shows up in our passage for this week. It's Genesis 34, and this is what the text says, verses 1 through 2. Now, Dinah, Leah's daughter, whom she bore to Jacob, went to meet the young women of the land. When Shechem, son of Hamor the Hivite, who ruled that area, saw her, grabbed her, forced himself on her, and sexually assaulted her. This story is devastating. We see that Dinah goes out into the land, and this man, Shechem, kind of carries out the steps of evil. He sees her, desires her, and then takes her for himself. After this moment, it's kind of bizarre. Shechem ends up desiring to want to marry Dinah. So him and his father go to Jacob and say, "We want to marry her." And strangely, Jacob says nothing. Matter of fact, the people who speak up the most are going to be Dinah's brothers. It's going to be Levi and Judah and some of the other brothers. But Jacob doesn't say much at all. If you fast forward into the story, you're going to see that Levi is actually going to be one of the people that carries out the revenge, right? We find out that Dinah is actually still being held captive by Shechem at his house. So she's actually not been brought home at all during this entire time. And so they're going to devise this plan to trick the Shechemites, the Hivites, into circumcising themselves, and then the sons of Jacob are going to take over them through the trickery and ends up slaughtering the people. It's a devastating story. Most people don't read Genesis 34. But I want us to notice the motif in the story. Jacob's silence. Silence is something that shows up throughout the book of Genesis. It's not a theme, but it is something that recurs enough to make us think that it wants us to feel something. For example, there's a moment when Abraham is silent, whenever he's asked to sacrifice his one son that is going to be passed down the inheritance to. And yet Abraham is silent in that moment. Another moment of silence is just Isaac as a character. Matter of fact, most of the time people don't remember Isaac at all. For someone who is part of the patriarch of going Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the book of Genesis kind of passes right over him. It goes Abraham, Jacob, Joseph. And so Isaac ends up being a very silent character. You think of even Adam all the way back to Genesis 3. Whenever Eve is being deceived and tricked by the serpent, Adam doesn't seem to say anything, even though he's there the entire time. And in this moment, Jacob, who talks a lot throughout the book of Genesis, whenever we get to his birth and on, talks a ton, and yet in this moment doesn't say a word. Matter of fact, he says something at the very end of the story, kind of chastising his sons for what they did. And yet the story ends with his sons asking a rhetorical question. Should we have let them treat our sister like a prostitute? And the story ends in silence. What we see with this motif and this literary pattern in the story is that although silence is totally a spiritual discipline in a noisy world, evil likes silence. And the remedy to silence whenever evil is showing up is not to be quiet or even more quiet or kind of sweep it underneath the rug. Instead, it is to prophetically proclaim goodness and truth and justice. Very much so, like I think of the Lord of the Rings, in this moment, whenever in the Fellowship of the Ring, Gandalf stops in the middle of this run after this monster's chasing him and his friends, and he stops in that moment at this bridge, and with his staff in his hand, yells out, "You shall not pass." This righteous anger builds in Gandalf, and he proclaims this proclamation of justice. The church is to do the same whenever evil starts popping its head up once again in our communities. I know that silence is a really good discipline for us, especially in a noisy world. When we're constantly hearing noises, people are constantly having headphones in, it makes sense to want to go to silence and to find the Lord, and we should totally do that. But sometimes silence is not the answer. And those times is when evil is showing up. In this story, Jacob should have spoken up for his daughter who had been hurt. And I think what we need to hear today as new creations walking in Jesus is to do the same. We are to use our voice and to prophetically proclaim the justice of God. May God's followers, may God's people seek the justice of the communities that we are a part of.